Hello ladies and gentlemen, Top Hat Gaming Man here, and today we're going to be peeling back the proverbial curtain to take a look at another one of professional wrestling's lesser told stories, as we delve into the very interesting, but also occasionally very rude, history of one of the more forgotten divas of the infamous Attitude Era, Stacey Carter, often better known as Miss Kitty or the Cat. Stacey's family were originally from West Memphis, Arkansas, but she was born in Memphis, Tennessee on September 29, 1970. This family move was decided upon due to her parents' divorce, which resulted in her mother deciding to ditch the southern redneck state of Texas for the southern redneck state of Tennessee. Stacey, however, ended up mostly growing up around Texas due to electing to move back in with her father until her teen years, not moving back in with her mother in Memphis until she left high school. Once back in Memphis, it was here that she met the man that she would be most synonymous with throughout her wrestling career, one of Memphis's all-time most famous sons. The man known as the King of Memphis, His Royal Highness Jerry Lawler. Now, those familiar with Jerry Lawler, as I'm sure most of you are, will probably be aware that he has a reputation as a bit of, shall we say, rapscallion with the ladies. So, it probably won't be all that surprising to learn that despite Stacey only being 18 when they met, and Lawler being married to his second wife Paula, that Jerry openly admitted that he considered starting an affair with Stacey right then and there. 10 points for honesty, I suppose. Jerry also had the common decency and courtesy to wait until he'd separated from Paula before he moved Stacey into his sizable abode around a year or so later, which was nice of him. Stacey had gone from a regular life working as a bank teller to living with one of the richest and most successful men in all of Memphis, but she was still several years away from any kind of wrestling pursuits at this stage. Using his considerable contacts, Lawler had got Stacey a job at a glamorous photography studio, and at one point she even ran her own Memphis hair salon. But the draw of the lights, the crowd, and most certainly the admiration and attention was too much for Miss Carter. She knew she wanted more, and with her partner, his connections, and all the power of nepotism he had at his disposal, she had the perfect way to get it, and get it she did. It didn't take too much persuading from Lawler to convince WWF bigwigs and high-ups to allow the extremely attractive and vivacious Carter to appear on their television programming, so she made her debut on the August 23rd edition of Monday Night Raw in a segment with Jeff Jarrett and Deborah. Jeff had been blaming his recent television losses on his current manager Deborah, so he kayfabe hired Stacey, now known as Miss Kitty, to be her personal assistant and hopefully stop her from making so many bloody mistakes. This was all part of a bigger storyline that's main focus was to portray Jeff Jarrett as an evil, misogynistic woman hater leading into his huge Intercontinental title match with Chyna, who just happens to be a woman herself, at the No Mercy 1999 pay-per-view. That match turned out to be an incredibly significant one, as Jeff Jarrett held the company up for anywhere between $300,000 and $500,000 depending on which source you read, as his contract had expired just hours before the event took place, and he was on his way to rival company WCW. The story of the build-up and fallout from that match could probably extend to an entire video in itself, but it was Jarrett's departure to WCW that facilitated the next and probably most well-remembered stage of Stacey Carter's career. Apparently, seeing the error of her ways and realising what a rascal Jeff Jarrett is, while simultaneously remembering to show solidarity with her own gender, Carter appeared alongside the new Intercontinental Champion Chyna the very next night on Raw. Dressed in a black wig and matching Xena Warrior Princess looking clobber, she literally looked like a miniature version of her far more muscular gal pal. This was actually quite a striking image, and Miss Kitty and Chyna became quite a popular pairing during their brief partnership. Despite the chemistry between the two, management began making the link between them more and more tenuous, as they had different plans for both ladies. Although she had very little actual in-ring training, it was decided that Miss Kitty would be given her first and only WWF Women's Championship at the Armageddon 1999 pay-per-view. It should be noted that the female wrestling scene of this era's WWF was a far cry from the woman's revolution, an emphasis on actual skilled in-ring competitors that we've grown accustomed to in recent years. The fact that the championship was contested under Four Corners evening gown match rules should tell you just about all you need to know. The rules of this encounter are to strip the clothes off of your opponent while frolicking around in what appears to be a bloody kids paddling pool. And this was all meant to be for a legitimate sports championship. The fantastic Catch as Catch Can inspired professional wrestling didn't stop there, as Miss Kitty decided to celebrate her victory by flashing not only the live crowd, but the live TV audience, her inflated and slightly unrealistic looking breasts. This was the first instance of intentional nudity in the history of WWF programming, and it was met with about as much opposition and controversy as one might expect. It also remains Stacey Carter's most remembered and replayed moment in her professional wrestling career. Well, isn't that something to be proud of? The proud moments were starting to come thick and fast as Stacey defended her title in a chocolate pudding match the next night on Raw, but not before announcing that she was officially changing her wrestling moniker to The Cat. This also essentially ended her partnership with Chyna, as she now had her own entrance music and dropped the Amazonian attire completely. The Cat's groundbreaking Women's Championship reign came to an end on the January 31st, 2000 edition of Monday Night Raw, where she lost a Lumberjill Snow Bunny match to Harvey Whippleman in drag. I really wish that this was some sort of silly joke, breaking up all the serious historical documentation with a nice little gag. But no, she lost one of the most prestigious titles in female wrestling history in a snow pool to Harvey Whippleman in drag. Wonderful! Now it's obviously pretty clear that Cat's role in WWF wasn't exactly a super serious one, and she was more than for titillation. I always have trouble with that word. But it was her next feud with the also untrained Terry Runnels that just went completely into the farcical TNA territory. The rivalry seemed to be based around removing articles of clothing from the other person or competing to see who could behave in the most promiscuous way, eventually culminating in a match where the winner would have to rub their nether regions in the loser's face to gain a victory. Again, this is not a joke aimed to poke fun at or disparage the WWF. They were literally the rules of the match. This rather neatly segues into Miss Kitty's final WWF feud, which was against the Right to Censor, who were rightly furious about the now Mrs. Lawler's flagrant exhibitionism. The Right to Censor, or RTC, was Vince McMahon's way of sticking it to the Parent Teachers Council, or PTC, and was meant to be a parody of their attempts to censor Vince's precious product. This feud would also heavily involve Stacey's new husband, as Jerry Lawler fought for the Cat's honour against the dastardly and unscrupulous group. The storyline built up to a stipulation match at the No Way Out pay-per-view on the 25th of February 2001, where the Cat would have to join RTC and lose her freedom if Jerry Lawler lost to the Right to Censor leader Steven Richards. A mistake from the clumsy Cat cost Lawler the match, but we would never get to see the next part of the story, as Stacey Lawler would be released from her WWF contract precisely 2 days later, in controversial circumstances. Feeling that his wife had been hard done by and wanted to show her support and solidarity, Jerry Lawler then shockingly quit the company too. It's not known exactly what led to Stacey's firing, but the popular narrative is that she was difficult to work with and problematic for writers. Jim Ross, who was not only head of talent relations in WWF at the time, but was also close personal friends with both Jerry and Stacey, had actually been at their wedding the previous year, and he believes that her insider knowledge of the wrestling industry may have led to animosity between her and the writers, as she'd been living with the King for almost 10 years at the time of her hiring. Much of his vast amounts of guru-like wrestling knowledge had apparently been passed on to her, which gave her a much more critical eye. Her willingness to make suggestions and ask the writers questions made her stand out like a sore thumb in an era of eye-candy divas, and it was this unwanted attention that ultimately led to her dismissal. Supposedly, WWF execs were flabbergasted that the King had left in support of his wife, but leave he did. Although negotiations were already underway to try and lure him back to Titan Towers, Lawler was immediately replaced at the commentary booth by the rather odious Paul Heyman, whose first act was to reveal live on air the real reason why Lawler had left, and he was replacing him. That's right, he'd done another one of those worked shoot promo thingies. He bloody loves them. This didn't exactly help strengthen relations between the WWF and the Lawler camp, but it was still hoped that reparations could be made, and Jerry could take his rightful place back at the commentary booth next to the barbecue sauce guzzling screaming lunatic Jim Ross. The major stumbling block was that WWF wouldn't hire Stacey back, and the King wouldn't come back to the WWF unless they hired Stacey too. This nonsense went on throughout the remainder of the year, until Stacey just decided that she'd had enough and out of the blue left the King and filed for divorce, leaving Jerry with a substantial amount of egg on his face. There were heavy rumours that Stacey had been having an affair with a wrestler by the name of Jack Dupp, who was part of a tag team with a hillbilly gimmick called the Dupps, around the time of her departure. It's even been speculated that this was public knowledge backstage, but there's little evidence to support this. We do know, however, that Stacey met Dupp when he was working at Jerry Lawler's own promotion in Memphis, and they did go on to have a short-lived relationship after her divorce. As for Jerry Lawler, it wasn't too long before he was rehired and resumed his commentary duties anyway. For Stacey, on the other hand, it was a different story. Such a sour taste was left with WWE higher-ups that even to this day, almost all records of her existence are lost to history. It's not quite the Benoit treatment, but it's not a million miles off. Stacey initially left the crazy world of wrestling altogether, and was living in Florida working in real estate for a while. She did end up returning to the ring for some extremely sporadic independent wrestling performances here and there, but she would never really do anything of note in professional wrestling again. Perhaps taking into account the fact that she had absolutely no training, no desire whatsoever to learn and precisely zero athletic ability, this was all probably for the best. Stacey's connections to professional wrestling did continue though, when she entered into a relationship and later married obscure former WWE SmackDown wrestler and answer to a trivia question somewhere, Kazani. And if you actually remember Kazani from SmackDown, you're a very nerdy individual, and you should go outside and make some friends. A wrestler more commonly known as Sin Bodhi married Stacey Carter in August of 2010, with stars from the world of wrestling such as Edge and Jimmy Hart in attendance. It seemed that Stacey had really settled down and found happiness with the man who went by the real name of Nick. It's nice that her story ends on such a happy note, after all the ups and downs and drama. Or at least it would if they hadn't divorced less than 3 years later, in 2013. It seems unlikely we'll see much more of the Cat or Miss Kitty in the public eye ever again, but now that she's back on speaking terms with Jerry Lawler, I suppose it's not outside of the realms of possibility. If they ever get really desperate for a female Hall of Fame inductee, I'm sure she'd be more than happy to accept. I just think that her contributions to the fascinating world of backstage gossip far outweigh her on-screen contributions, but her salacious existence is an interesting one, nonetheless. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was the mad story of Stacey Carter, aka Miss Kitty, aka the Cat. Let me know what you thought of today's content and which person from obscure wrestling trivia that you would like to see highlighted on here next. If you enjoyed today's content, be sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell to see all of my regular uploads. And if you like gaming, why not check out my gaming channel known as Top Hat Gaming Man. Yeah, cheerio.